on the phone with us is David Schwartz from Newsday. Hello, David. It's Bill and John from this week's Long Island News. And
hey, Bill and John.
Hey,
thanks for joining us.
You've got the job of. There's so many people that I know that live in this area in Bethpage and Plainview and all those surrounding areas, and we've been talking about contaminated soil for a long time.
Yeah.
So, bring us up to date.
Sure. So the latest is this park, Bethpage Community Park, was donated by Grumman back in the 1960s to the town of Oyster Bay, and generations of families played there and kids played on the ball fields there. Then later on, they realized that it used to be a former waste site there, and there was a rag pit area where they used to put rags that were soaked in this cleaning solvent that were used in the manufacturing of aircraft parts.
Right.
And so they realized that there was a lot of contamination there. So they've been, for going on 18 years now, they've been trying to clean up various parts of it. Some parts have been cleaned up. The town of Oyster Bay cleaned up parts of it. But the latest here is that just when they thought that they were prepared to clean up one area, the ball field area that Northrop Grumman is cleaning up, they realized that some of the contamination has spread from there. So it's new areas of contamination underneath the soil there.
All right. This is, it seems tantamount to putting out part of a fire and then walking away and expecting the rest of the building not to burn down anyway,
Yeah, so from the town of Oyster Bay's perspective, that's, I think, their feelings about this is that because Northrop Grumman has taken so long to clean up that ball field area, the contamination has been allowed to spread.
Right. And wasn't this this was continuing? Northrop Grumman has been fighting with the Navy, and so the Northrop says it's the Navy says it's Northrop.
Well, that's true for certain areas and for the groundwater portion, but this area, the Northrop Grumman has said they've signed agreements with the state to say that they accepted responsibility and that they were going to clean up this portion.
Okay.
So now it's just kind of a technical problem of how are they going to do it. They've drilled 230 wells down into the ground where they plan to. Now they're saying this spring they're going to turn on these wells and they're going to extract the contamination from the soil through these wells. But certainly there's a lot of residents that we talk to that feel some frustration with the pace of things.
Yeah. And also, this is a matter of you can't just make it a little cleaner. You've either got to take this stuff out and get rid of it or not. There's no middle ground, right? What is it?
Well,
trichloroethylene.
Right, and that's carcinogen. Health effects have been tied to various cancers, liver and kidney cancers. But in this case, what both the town and the state are saying is that there's no immediate risk to the public, that this contamination that we're talking about now is 30 to 50 feet below the ground, so it's not there. But that doesn't mean that they're not frustrated and that there's not a feeling of, that they want to see something done.
Yeah, and I've lived on Long Island my whole life. There are. This isn't the only site that they used to talk about either. Do you remember? I think they referred to it as the Liberty site.
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, it's Motor Avenue in Farmingdale. And in the 1920s, there was a photo engraving shop that was on the corner of Main Street and Motor Avenue. And for, 30 years, they dumped all of the photo engraving chemicals that they used to use on photo engraving plates, dumped them right into the ground.
Oh, wow.
And then there are other businesses along that strip. One was Fiberglass Resources. They used to make the hollow drill things that, they drill them down in the ground, so they pump the oil up in the middle of them. Well, they were made of fiberglass. So that was all dumped into the ground,
Of course.
Yeah, and it's amazing. So about a month ago, I did a story that some folks on Long Island are looking at New York City's water, and New York City gets their water from upstate, a series of reservoirs and dams, and they're looking at trying to buy water from New York City's supply in part because of how contaminated our aquifer is. I mean, for decades, we have this abundant source of water beneath our feet, but anything we do, residential, commercial, agricultural, industrial, like all the 25,000 Grumman jobs and the defense industry, and as you say, the fiberglass, everything that we did for a long time, that water that would go back into the ground and recharge and kind of mingle with our drinking water.
And it's,
and so it's an ongoing struggle that everyone's trying to deal with now.
Yeah. I think, just as you mentioned those realities, I guess it kind of is unfortunate, it seems, that although this is another egregious specific incident here, that it's part of a much larger historical kind of happening of people kind of having these situations occur and then not realizing till later and many years later. I guess, again, would that kind of be one of the major arguments that they're making, that, again, this is not any more particularly egregious than some of the other issues? Or, like, what really has kind of been the reasoning for it to take so long for these sites that they
So from Northrop Grumman's perspective, and certainly I reached out to them many times. They didn't call me back for this article, but, we've spoken to them in the past, and their position has been, they've laid out in document after document. So to kind of put myself in their shoes, I think their argument is that, look, we're busy winning world wars and putting people on the moon, and the knowledge about what we were doing to the aquifer wasn't there at the time. And now in later years, this is incredibly technical and expensive. And one issue is, they're allowed to consider what the most cost-effective remedy is, right?
And it sounds like a pretty good argument, except for the lag time. Because when they did find out there was something wrong with it, it took them 18 years after that to do something.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, you could even go back further and say 1976 is when the first Bethpage Water District well was impacted, so they knew there was...
That's only 40 years ago, right?
So, and this stuff, their argument is it's very hard to map. You can't tell, it's as far as 900 feet below ground. We don't know how it's going. But then, to put my hat onto the water district wells, they said, well, look, we've been warning about the spread of this. We've been presenting plans about how you could stop it, and you guys haven't been willing to do this.
Well, I got to ask you. I'm going to ask you a loaded question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. I mean, because it's a guess. Do you think they're ever really going to clean this up?
Well, you're right. I am going to, do a little dodge and weave.
Yeah, I don't blame you, but I'm just thinking about that.
I will tell you this: so the community has for years been frustrated not only with the Navy and Grumman, but with the state, and feeling like the state hasn't been pushing them as hard as they could, or forcing them to do some of this.
Right.
Recently, Governor Cuomo has and the state Department of Environmental Conservation has put forward a much more aggressive plan. It's a $585 million plan. There are like 24 wells that they're going to put in there, and the idea is to create a barrier with these wells where they're pumping out the water, treating it, and then recharging the water. And the idea is to stop it from spreading.
Right. I mean, you know what? And in the arena of public relations, that sounds great. But that still doesn't tell me if that's going to fix it.
Well, even if it cleans up that one site, then you find out that there's another
that's
site.
what I mean. It's kind of like, hey, we have another treatment. You're still
and the fine print there is that even with that treatment plan, it's going to take over 100 years of operating that plan to eliminate most, nearly all of the contamination.
So during which time we'll all be drinking bottled water anyway.
Well, the water district folks would say bottled water isn't tested as much as their water. But
true.
Look, I get those calls when I do these stories. People ask me what they should do. You know, it's a difficult situation that everyone is in.
Yeah,
Of course.
Yeah.
And it's really a shame because Long Island sat on an aquifer, and it was, people would even say, I moved here because of the way that the water was gotten in this area. It was perfect.
A beautiful resource. People know New York
Barrens,
City, the water.
Well, what's interesting about the New York water, I used to work in the construction industry with materials and stuff. Mm-hmm. They found that some of the pipes that carry that water from upstate New York is still made out of wood.
Huh.
Because they were laid there in the 1700s.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you know what? They still work.
Yeah, better than what we see what happens with lead sometimes.
Right, exactly, which is what's amazing. They're still fine. That's why nobody changed them out, because they don't have a problem with those. And it's a hollowed out tree.
Yeah.
And let me just, to go back to the local water, I should say that they are, Bethpage Water District, for example, they spend a lot of money and a lot of effort to treat this water to the state and federal standards. They're, they are trying to keep on top of this and treat the water there. So,
you know what? I feel sorry for the water guys because they can only deliver what they get.
Yeah,
and
resources they're given.
Yeah, it's one of the things though that people have brought up in the past, and like they used to send out lists of the things they tested for. Now they would come and just say, okay, your water's safe. But when you looked at the list of things, the 15 new chemicals that we've had since they wrote that list aren't on it.
Always a game of catch up.
Yeah, trichloroethylene never made the list that they wrote in 1950.
Yeah. I mean,
but my water's safe.
Excellent point. And this is what they're dealing with now. I've written a lot about a chemical called 1,4-dioxane.
Yes.
Which is like and it's what's called an emerging contaminant. And what that means is it's not been regulated in the past, and now they're looking to regulate it. And they did testing. They found it pretty widely, including in Bethpage at, some pretty high levels.
Well, that's really, you bring up a point right there is that there may be chemicals that they haven't even started to look for yet.
Yeah, I mean, so the federal government is saying, test for these 10 chemicals, and then a few years later they're saying test for these additional chemicals, and it's ongoing, and you're exactly right. So there are more emerging contaminants. One thing in the water world is, there are 80,000 chemicals out there, man-made chemicals or other chemicals in commercial use right now. We regulate for maybe 100 of them, right? And so a lot of this is just unknown. Yeah. What's out there right now.
Well, it almost might be a better way to track if some of these things are there, if they look at the diseases in the local population and see if the...
That's what we're seeing. We're seeing the clusters in medical
but we can't connect them to
experts.
We can't necessarily connect them to specific...
Correlation versus causation, of course. That's the issue.
Because, I mean, I've heard it, and maybe it's just anecdotal, but the cancer rate on Long Island is, I think, a little bit higher than... a lot of other parts in the nation.
Yeah, for certain cancers, you're right. And there have been studies. There was a big breast cancer study, maybe a decade or two ago, and it found no environmental factors that have led to it. The cancer rates here. But studying some of this and looking at some of this, let me back up. And then Bethpage, the residents there. Or many of the residents there certainly are worried about health effects, and they feel like certain cancers are more prevalent there. But we should say the state did a study. They did one study, and they didn't find any higher rates there. There has been criticism of that, but just in general, it is very hard with the science, with people moving around, to identify these clusters and then to tie it to a specific source of pollution. And some of that is just the difficulty of all these cancers.
Massive undertaking.
Tough thing.
Yeah, of course.
I'll tell you, and I heard a story a while ago about there was one lady, and this is anecdotal, and this is just a story. There was a lady in, I think it was Farmingdale, and it was pertaining to the Motor Avenue, the Liberty site, and she had kept calling either the EPA or her representative to the point of, really kind of got them mad that she's calling so much. And so the final, she said, I want to see some action. I want to see the EPA come in here with dump trucks or something, And the guy's reaction to her was, lady, if you keep calling us, what he basically was saying was there is no remedy. If you keep calling us, the only remedy is to take bulldozers and bulldoze all the houses from Motor Avenue right down to Jones Beach.
Well, there's no short-term fix.
Because it's going to leach all the way, and we can't stop it.
Yeah.
and do you have hope that any, the things that they come up with are really going to alleviate this to...
Well, I mean, to bring it back to Bethpage, I think the latest state plan from the, not my opinion, but let me say the water districts feel, not just Bethpage, but, Massapequa Water District, South Farmingdale Water District. I think they feel like there's some hope with this latest state plan because it is more aggressive. It will remove more contaminants from the ground quicker than, what they're doing now. So I think that is a sign of hope, is that, the state has taken a more aggressive tact on this. But as far as long term, some people are arguing the New York City water is at least some type of fix. But then you don't want to hook up into New York City water and then just say, forget about it. Let's we can do whatever we want to the aquifer now because we don't need it for drinking water.
But it would seem as though their real answer is that the water they're going to suck out of the ground, they're going to clean. They're not necessarily going to clean the aquifer. They're just going to clean the water before they deliver it to your house. So,
well, that's what they've been doing. And to be clear, Bethpage Water District has been meeting the state and federal standards. They've been pumping it out and treating it through really, impressive big equipment here of air strippers and giant granulated activated carbon. What the latest plan is to treat it and then just to recharge it into the aquifer. So it, you're taking out the contaminated water from the aquifer, and then you're cleaning it, and then you're allowing it to seep back into the ground and recharge the aquifer as cleaner water, or as clean water.
Right. Oh, boy. Well, I guess this is going to be an ongoing thing. So
yeah, definitely seems it. Isn't going away anytime soon, unfortunately.
We'll certainly get to talk to you again the next time.
Well, I really appreciate it.
No, we appreciate it. Thank you very much, David.
All right, take care.
You take care, too. Bye-bye.